Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the April 29th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting for the City of Nanaimo. I'm Acting Mayor Ian Thorpe. I'll be chairing the meeting this afternoon, and I'd like to first recognize that we are holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the East Nunamic First Nation. Our clerk today, is Ms. Sheila Gurry, and we have the ability to have councillors attend virtually. I'm not seeing anybody on the screen just yet, but a couple of councillors may join us as the meeting progresses. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the question period sign-up sheet, which is located on the table by the double doors to my left. Please note that questions are for agenda items only. Now, before we start the meeting, I would like to take a few moments to remind those who are attending in person about the rules of decorum for all council and committee meetings. A meeting of council is intended to be a place where democracy can freely take place in a respectful and safe manner. The council chambers is a workplace, and there are considerations council and staff must make in order to ensure that a safe work environment exists in accordance with WorkSafe BC regulations. To support this, disrespectful conduct will not be tolerated, so we ask, please, that there will be no cheering, jeering, or other outbursts from the gallery at any time. This will ensure that anyone speaking, whether it be a delegation, member of council, or staff, is not interrupted and can make their point freely without distraction or fear of ridicule. In instances where a speaker is being inappropriate or has exceeded their time limit, their microphone will be cut off. Similarly, if there are outbursts by any person in the gallery, they will be asked to stop, and if they do not comply, they may be asked to leave as permitted under Section 133 of the Community Charter. If necessary, council may call a recess in order to reset the environment of the council chambers. It is our genuine belief that if everyone is respectful of these basic considerations, this meeting and future meetings will be more effective in furthering the business of the City of Nanaimo. On to the first item on the agenda, Ms. Gurry, and that is the introduction of late items.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. There are no late items for this agenda today.
Thank you very much. Then I'll ask for a motion for adoption of the agenda as circulated. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Eastmuir. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Next, a motion for adoption of minutes that were circulated. These were from the meetings of March 11, 2024 and March 25, 2024. Councillor Hemmons moving to receive those. Councillor Perino seconding. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. So that moves us to item 5 on the agenda, which is agenda planning. And again, I'll turn to Ms. Gurry for an update on that.
Thank you, Chair. For upcoming topics and initiatives on your agenda, they are showing May 13th, 2024. The GPC meeting, what is scheduled for that meeting is the Geotechnical Guidelines Review, which the committee talked about and discussed that would be coming to May 13th at your last GPC meeting. As well, we have allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. That is a staff initiative. However, it works with the motion coming forward from council, as that presentation will include options for pedestrian safety improvements near Bayview School. And that's per your April 22nd, 2024 council motion. So those topics are coming to May 13th. As well, for June 10th, we have the alternative approval process, and that will be the review and discussion of policy options scheduled for your upcoming meetings. Future topics to be determined, dates to be determined, are listed there as well. And I'm happy to take any questions or hear any upcoming topic motions that the committee may have this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. I see Councillor Eastmuir.
Thank you. Through you to staff, I have a question about the unallocated pedestrian funds, and if having the meeting on May 13th gives us enough time to communicate with the school district about their priority projects. And I just wondered, like in those meetings that happen between the city and the school district about safety and traffic concerns and that sort of thing. Does the school board have a similar, like, prioritized list of projects? And are you sort of cross-referencing between the cities and the school districts when we're looking at advancing these projects?
Sorry.
Through the chair to Councillor Eastmere, I think that it's really a joint effort on on pedestrian projects around schools. So they're focused on the school environment, the school property itself, and then when we come together, it's about the frontage, and largely our efforts are around the active school travel program. Excuse me, where the drive to 5-minute kind of ethos is coming in. So as we work through each of the projects, we're in fairly frequent contact. Not only we have regular transportation type meetings, transportation safety meetings, but we're in frequent contact with the board staff.
So we would have time to get a sense from the school district what their concerns are around Bayview, so that can inform our discussion on the 13th?
Through the chair, that these discussions are frequent and ongoing, and so largely with Bayview, it's been on not necessarily sidewalks immediately around the school, but the intersections, some of the intersection safety, and that's what we've heard from, certainly from the neighborhood, and that the school is not so focused, or the school board, school district staff are not so focused on sidewalks in the school to date, anyhow.
But the school district has raised concerns about the intersections in that area?
Correct.
Okay, that's good to know. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Another good example of the ongoing cooperation between the city and the school district. Councillor Hemmons, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Following up on that, so I just want to confirm that I heard that the school district has flagged concerns around Bayview. I just want to make sure if we're looking at improvements around schools as part of the pedestrian unallocated at the GPC, that the school district is aware and that they have an opportunity to weigh in on that. So we're not just picking schools, like we're looking at it holistically.
Correct. Through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, I think that's a good question. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. The school district staff have not raised concerns immediately around pedestrian immediately adjacent to the school, but are aware and participating in those discussions with the intersections that are nearby. For instance, Victoria and Needham and the highway in Needham. So does that help?
Thank you, that helps. And is the school district aware that we will be having this conversation about Bayview specifically?
Yes, I believe they are.
And they're comfortable with us looking at improvements around Bayview exclusively, not at improvements around schools in general. I'm sure you can see where I'm going. We've had a really strong lobby, I think,
right,
from that community, which is amazing. I just want to make sure that we're following process, that we can communicate clearly, so we're not saying that the biggest, strongest lobby gets the improvements.
The context is important for the entire discussion, and the process is fairly clear. I think in staff's mind and the school district's mind, I wouldn't say we've had those specific discussions with them, but certainly it's on our radar to have those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any other questions regarding agenda planning? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Gurry. Council will move to the first of a number of reports this afternoon. We have a reasonably heavy agenda, and I'm hoping that we can move through things as efficiently as possible. We're going to start with Prosperous Nanaimo, certainly a priority, and a draft monitoring strategy. And Mr. Holm, I'll let you do the introductions.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Good afternoon. And this is something that we've been very much looking forward to getting in front of the committee. The monitoring strategy, along with the integrated action plan, are key elements of implementation and monitoring progress on policy objectives in the city plan. The draft monitoring strategy represents a significant amount of work to develop the monitoring aspect of that. Ms. Ting Pan, Manager of Sustainability, will be providing an overview, but obviously, and she's, Ms. Pan's been shepherding this project, but obviously supported by larger cast staff here representing many service areas within the city to help answer questions if needed. With that, I'm happy to turn it over to Ms. Pan, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holmes. So, Ms. Pan, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. Council will have a chance, of course, to ask questions, and then eventually we'll get to a possible recommendation. So, please carry on.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the many staff members who have contributed and continue to work on the monitoring strategy, and presenting you this draft monitoring strategy for feedback. So I'll give a quick overview, and we'll open up to questions and feedbacks, and we'll also have several staff members available to address any specific questions you may have. So as Mr. Holmes mentioned, monitoring strategy is one of the key documents to support the implementation of the city plan. So what it's supposed to do is to provide regular and meaningful and holistic insights and tell us if our actions are effective. As we have included in the Integrated Action Plan, it's supposed to work in tandem with the IEP, and more importantly, to track our progress towards the city goals that are defined in the city plan. So the Nanaimo framework that we work off of is the way to plan for Nanaimo's future in a balanced and integrated way. It is built around this idea that as a place for our residents to thrive is where we respect ecological boundaries and also provide sufficient social foundations for all to thrive. And that framework is translated into these 5 city goals, as you're probably very familiar with, the green, connected, healthy, empowered, and prosperous Nanaimo. So the first step that we took is to identify the areas of impact that we want to monitor and how they're connected to the overall framework and also the different goal areas. So what you're seeing in this figure is we identified 21 areas of impact that belong to different goal areas in the city plan. And in order to monitor them, so each goal area has several elements. They all have key indicators, have sustainability end goals, and I will explain what they really mean. So key indicators are small selection of indicators at a pretty high level to tell us how we're doing, and also how close and how far we are to our defined goals and aspirations. Sustainability end goals, they are goals or aspirations that we try to quantify based on either science or ethical standpoint, and it take into account the environmental limits as well as a basic standard of well-being that we believe our residents have a claim of achieving. And I'll have an example later on to really showcase what this really means. When viewed together, these key indicators against the sustainability end goals should help us recognize and understand the interconnections between key issues and effects of cities' efforts. And each goal area also has supportive indicators. These are going to tell us how we're doing in specific areas and show us over time if we're moving in the right direction. They're meant to offer specific insights and guide our actions. They can be added if we have need for new information, or they can be retired if they're no longer relevant. Targets will show us what we wish to achieve and when we want to achieve it by, and they will help us focus our efforts. And they're not necessarily tied to that final goals or destinations, but they're very useful in monitoring our performance. So if I use an analogy, if you imagine the key indicators are the ones that really help us take a step back and zoom out, be able to see the big pictures. So as in the picture on the left, that will help show the color and the shape, understanding the relationship between different elements. whereas the supportive indicators, they are more like those little dots that make up the pictures, and they give you the specifics and insights and details that might be lacking or not be able to see at the high level. Further, and if you observe in this painting that there's also a lot of gaps, and so it really shows that indicators and data can only take you so far. So that's why we're also proposing kind of a 4-year in-depth report to be able to fill those gaps with professional knowledge and staff comments, the narratives that it supports how we're doing. So on a lighter note, we should all know the question, the answer to this question, which one is better? The city plan framework might have taken the shape of a donut, but when it comes to monitoring data and visualizing the information at a glance, we took inspiration from our own tweet and found it much more effective. And I will show you. So this is the indicators at a glance, shown as a monitoring bar. So the middle section is the sweet spot where we can thrive. And you can see at the top, it really represents that ecological ceilings where we have all the indicators for the green Nanaimo. And then at the bottom, we have these social foundations. So that was represented by these 4 other city plan goals. And so this plotted out as kind of the ideal version. So if we live in an ideal, like the city that we visioned, then we should be staying within those boundaries and limits. And I just want to also show you that preliminarily we have plotted our data that is available to us for 2021 to show what it might look like. So the gray area represents the data, the indicators that we currently don't have data or haven't been fully developed. But as you can see, it also shows some of the areas that are doing really well. So the green bar means that we are achieving our end goals and are doing really well. And then the red bar shows how we get into those the environmental overshoot or social shortfall areas. And the further the red bar extends from the center, the further we are from our ideal. So this gives you kind of at a glance idea of how they look like. And so they are useful in terms of recognizing the interconnections between different goal areas and also area impact. For example, at this level, if you look at if we improve, say, walkability or transit and bikeability to help people get to their daily needs without the use of a vehicle and through active transportation, it stands to reason that it helps a number of things. So it could reduce our emissions for transportation. And if we can help lower the household spending on transportation, that could mean more money can be spent on housing, on food, recreation and wellness support, and it could also help improve equity in our city. So as you can see that, this helps examine how they're related to each other, and how, on the other hand, it could also highlight potential conflicts in those areas, some actions that might actually put some of our goals at odds, and that creates opportunity to see if there is other creative and alternative options. And I will just quickly walk you through 2 examples so that you can see how the indicators and the metrics and the targets work. So the first example is related to water resources. So that's one of the areas of impact that we identified. The key indicator for this one is the sufficiency of a reservoir supply. Our sustainability angle is defined that the water level at Jump Lake Reservoir has to be maintained at 30% of reservoir capacity or above every day in a year. So that is something that we discovered through conversation with our staff at the water team, that that is actually a critical threshold in order to ensure that we have sufficient water to go through drought and to accommodate growth in population, and to make sure that a community can, like business, can still function. So the metrics is always in this formula. So the numerator, or one side of the formula, this side is really looking at our measured performance. So what are we measuring, how we're doing. and the other side is always our end goal. So in this case, what we're measuring is the number of days per year that reservoir capacity is at or above 30%. And as I say, that we want it to be at 30% or at or above every day of the year, so that end goal is 365 days a year. So if we're meeting that goal, then our score should be 100%, and that means that we're meeting our goals and we're sustainable. And if we're dropping below that, that means that we're not quite meeting our goal. And in water resources, there are a number of other indicators that help us identify kind of our overall performance. And so there are several. One is the annual total water consumption. We also have an average water consumption per person per day and residential water consumption per person per day. And in the water conservation plan, we have identified a target for the average water consumption per person per day. Another example is the land use and land health. So in these areas of impact, we identified a key indicator, the tree canopy coverage neighborhood. The sustainability end goal is that every neighborhood has at least a 30% tree canopy coverage. So note that this is not just a citywide tree canopy coverage percentage, but this is what I was referring earlier as that it kind of integrates into like both taking into account the environmental limits as well as the kind of the basic standard living that will be important to our residents. So the metric here is what we're measuring is the number of neighborhoods with at least a 30% tree canopy coverage, and our end goal is that all the neighborhoods could have at least 30%. And so one of the supportive indicators here is the citywide tree canopy coverage, and we did have a target from the previous urban forest strategy, which is 32% by 2020. And on the right, you can see some of the background analysis that has been recently completed. So in 2022, the tree canopy coverage by neighborhood was broken down here. And at the bottom, you can see the citywide tree canopy coverage, which stands at 33% at the moment. But you can also see across the neighborhoods how uneven that coverage distribute. So just a quick update on our progress. So 21 areas of impact have been identified, and 19 of them are currently activated with a key indicator. There are 2 areas of impact, ocean health and air quality, that we currently don't recommend monitoring unless we have new tools or this becomes a much more significant issues in our community. And in those areas of impact, we have identified 23 key indicators. 17 of them have already got metrics, and 13 of them we could produce scores with data. And then we have also included 39 and growing supportive indicators. Currently 27 of them we have data to support, and 14 of them have targets associated with them. And I just want to share briefly some of the lessons learned over the last year or so through this monitoring strategy development. What we found is that development of indicators is an iterative process. And what you see here is the outcome of many conversations with different teams that represent our current thinking, but we also recognize that new information and knowledge will come online, and that might need to evolve and adapt. The second lesson is quantifying our goals in the context of a Nanaimo framework requires a fair bit of innovation and could be quite complex in some areas. So aside from the key indicators that we have included in this draft, there are still, I think, 7 key indicators that haven't been developed. And those are the areas that we did have some research and had some discussions and realized that they're not very easy to define. And so that still is a bit of a question mark for us, and it requires a bit more conversation and research, and potentially something that we have to hold for a while. The third lesson is that the advancement in information technology, such as the geographic information systems, really holds great potential for generating data much more efficiently and be able to conduct a more complex analysis. So one of the examples that I shown to you about the tree canopy coverage, and in the past, to conduct or to get coverage, preventive coverage analysis, detailed analysis, we have to carry out a fairly comprehensive tree assessment study, and that is typically done once in a decade. But GIS was able to use our high-quality imagery and LiDAR information, and also combined with machine learning, they could now generate an estimate at a fairly good precision every 2 years, and they could also go back in time to generate those data all the way back to 2009, which will be very valuable actually for us to track our progress. So all of these were not really feasible or available before, but now that with this advancement, it becomes much more likely that we can rely on. So in terms of a monitoring strategy reviewing timeframes, there are 2 timeframes that we're proposing. So if we receive direction to proceed in principle and be able to release this data this fall, then our plan is that every year that we'll update the data and release the monitoring data in Q4, kind of in tandem with the integrated action plan review. And then every 4 years, we'll provide a more comprehensive monitoring report with more analysis and then commentaries from staff. Proposed next step, so we still have some data collection and indicator development to be done. And we're hoping that we could move into developing a public-facing webpage and eventually transition to a dynamic dashboard. Would like to engage the committee in the near future on the monitoring process and then assess different engagement options of how to get input from the community. And I would like to prepare the public release of the monitoring data online later this year. So option 1 of the recommendation is that the Government and Priorities Committee recommend that Council endorse in principle the draft monitoring strategy and engagement framework and direct staff to proceed with next steps as outlined in this report. And option 2 is for the committee to provide alternate direction. And so that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions as the best that I can, and or direct that to any staff who are in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pan. Very clear report. I appreciate that. I have a couple of councillors with questions. Councillor Manley is first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And yeah, reading through it was interesting to see, some of the different ways that we need to collect data. And I'm sure you're using StatsCan, and I'm thinking about air quality or the ocean quality. Department of Fisheries and Oceans is monitoring there, and air quality is monitored by senior levels of government as well. So are you collecting data from those kind of sources as well, as many sources as you can?
Through the chair, so yes, there's data available for air quality and potentially for ocean water quality. And the reason that we're not recommending monitoring them at this point was really because it is a little bit hard to establish the connection of our functions and tools that is at our disposal and how that affects, something as huge and diffuse as air quality of the region and, ocean water. It's fairly hard to establish that causal relationship. But I think we could totally have supportive indicators that help us, track the trend. It is just probably not recommended for monitoring at that level at the moment.
Okay, and in StatsCan, you're getting like demographic information on income and income equality and for different neighborhoods, I'm assuming?
Yes, okay. Those are possible data sources.
One of the concerns I had just looking at the options was just about how the amount of staff time that could be taken up by some of this, and then limited capacity. And I know we're going through this whole process of trying to meet the new qualifications of the provincial government in terms of all of the regulations around housing, etc. And so one of the comments I have is just about in terms of priority shifting, that we want to keep on track in terms of making sure we get the grants we need, and that we're actually able to do the work to ensure that we can improve the well-being of the community and protect things like biodiversity, and not be too sidetracked by trying to figure out metrics and data. So that would be my one comment there. I like the Nanaimo Bar in the sweet spot. Please don't give that information to the World Economic Forum. I don't want them using that as a model. But I think it's important to measure well-being and to measure the environmental status of our community, because if we just measure by using things like gross domestic product, we could have potholes up and down Bowen Road, and it would be great for the GDP with all the blown tires and wrecked rims and tow trucks, operators, and everything else. But in terms of well-being and the environment that we live in, we need to take all of those things into consideration, because it's more than just about money. So appreciate that, the report and the information you provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. And yes, I like the Nanaimo Monitoring Bar as well. I was never very fond of the donut, so I appreciate the Nanaimo Bar. Councillor Hemmons, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff. It's really great to see this come together. I think this has been in the works for a while, so thank you. A section that I've always been very curious about, and that I'm noticing an absence of data in, again, is the Empowered Nanaimo section. So how are we going to measure inclusion and diversity? How are we going to measure political voice? How are we going to measure investment in arts, culture, and heritage? And I'm just curious if you can flesh out. This is the section that has the fewest indicators, and it seems like, and for all the reasons you can imagine, it's difficult to figure out how we're going to measure this. So if you can provide any sort of info on when we might tackle these and what that might look like in terms of the overall strategy, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Hemmons. Those are great questions. I think that because when we're looking at all the indicators at the beginning of this project, we recognize that some indicators, there is a lot of data, a lot of research. It's fairly easy to get a consensus through our professional knowledge that this is what we should measure. And we had a few conversations around those empowered areas of indicators, and it becomes very clear that there isn't sufficient data, and there just hasn't been enough consensus that we can build in terms of what are the ones that we should really decide on. So we're going to continue to have those conversations. We just haven't landed on anything that we think are ready to be recommended yet. We're looking at other cities and examples. I think that very likely we'll recommend some supportive indicators to help us track our progress while we continue to research and find out what we can really land eventually. For example, the equity indicator, that's probably something that we look a bit more into. There are good examples out there, but they require a fair bit of dedicated resources. That's typically done by larger cities with diversity and equity office that partners with universities and have a very well documented documentation, but also has a lot of data demand. So for those reasons, we didn't dive into those too much. We want to be able to bring, those ones that are feasible right now to the committee, and then when we are able to actually have a better understanding of what it takes to potentially monitor, then we can probably give the committee some options as to how we want to proceed.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, I'd suggest that for the inclusion and diversity, that would be an interesting exercise for the Akaya Committee to try to figure out how we might measure that. And in terms of political voice, there was a report by the Community Engagement Task Force, I believe from 2017, that highlighted some things that the city could do to increase engagement. And I believe that we're already doing a few of them. So it might be interesting to go back and check and see if we've made any improvements there. Thank you. Great report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmons. And before we proceed, I'll just note that Councillor Armstrong has joined the meeting virtually, and I've added you to my speakers list, Councillor Armstrong. But before you, I have Councillors Geselbrock, Perino, and Mayor Krog. Councillor Geselbrock.
Great, through you, Chair. Thanks so much for the report. I know there's a lot of work that went into doing this, and I really appreciate it. I like the Nanaimo framework set up. I think that's a good way of presenting it, and one that may be more successful in branding. So thank you. Just with the Empowered Nanaimo, I do think that's one area that, you know, I forget the language you use, but there's like the targeted indicators, and there's sort of the second tier. But, you know, the work that we are doing around engagement, to be able to like monitor that and see, are we expanding in terms of the amount of people that are engaging in our engagement efforts, you know, what demographics are engaging, and, you know, maybe looking at, you know, if there's things with voter turnout that we could be monitoring even at a every 4-year type thing, you know, can be telling if we're moving in the right direction or not. And then, you know, I think part of the vision around having this monitoring was around the public engagement around it. And so, you know, I like the Nanaimo bar dashboard, and how that can be communicated, and then every year being able to communicate that out to the community to see, you know, where we are in terms of these metrics, and then to feed that into our budgeting cycle. And I think I'm curious, just the thought, like, will there be a follow-up? I know there's been talk about potentially a monitoring committee or other forms of engagement. Is that something that you are going to be presenting at a follow-up at GPC?
Through the chair, yes. So we intentionally want to take this as a two-step process because there is a lot of information in the proposed framework, and we really want to get a sense of, you know, have a check-in and see if that was in the right direction. And then that will, once we get the direction potentially this afternoon, then we'll be able to, you know, move forward with some engagement options for consideration, and we'll be able to recommend, you know, what options we think that will be compatible with this framework, and how to ensure that interconnections between different goal areas is not lost when we're monitoring our progress.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on that then, yes, like, because I think that engagement process twofold is to like be able to have like an annual process that the community becomes more aware about where we're at in terms of our progress on these methods, but also then some community engagement that reflects on our metrics and feeds into the integrated action plan, so that there can be community input on, you know, what actions we are taking, and then and I think the Q4 timing is good because that'll feed into sort of like the budget discussions. Great, thank you. That's all I got for right now.
And I believe Ms. Gurry had something to add.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a couple of things to that discussion. First, just going back to the Empowered Nanaimo, and Councilor Geselbrock brought up voter turnout. Me and Ms. Pan spoke about that as well too, and she did get all the metrics for the last 5 by-elections that we've had in Nanaimo. But what we found just by even looking at them, because they go up and down in turnout and engagement, it's really subjective. So it's what's going on in the political atmosphere in Nanaimo that brings voter turnout. So it's really hard to measure. So it's like a political atmosphere that draws people out to an election. So a little bit hard to measure, but still looking at those opportunities. And then for the monitoring committees, that is listed on the GPC as an upcoming topic. But again, as Ms. Pan said, we wanted to bring this here first. And I wanted to hear some discussion because as Ms. Pan was noting, there'll be an annual review of the integrated action plan, and then every 4 years, an actual larger review of the monitoring report, like a report back on the monitoring strategy. So I'm wondering what, I'm looking for some dialogue, or what exactly a monitoring committee or committees would do. Like, I'm looking for more conversation about that, or some more input on that when we report back on that. So anything you have to say about that would be helpful.
I've got more comments, but I'll wait for the next round.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perino, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and a question through you to Ms. Pan. Great report, and I understand that it's going to go live in the Q4. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So, if for me, one of the fascinating slides was the land use and land health, where you've actually got the 2022 tree canopy coverage by neighborhood, which I thought was fascinating to see where our successes and where we could actually have some improvement. So I'm just wondering, when this document goes live, will we have some direction for the public about what they might be able to do to improve in some areas? So in other words, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're monitoring, now here's where you and your neighborhood could improve. So, you know, when I look at this, I think, wow, some areas, you're as high as, 68% in the Ocean View for tree canopy, and yet we're low, obviously in the city center, obviously with all the buildings and so forth, Newcastle low, you know, Northfield low. You know, how can we help people to do what they can, and how do we direct our own staff to, so that's the area where we have to improve the tree canopy. What are we doing for that?
Yeah, through the chair, I think that is still kind of to be formed. We did some kind of webpage mock-up. There's a lot more data and raw data and analysis that is not included in the PDF document or in this report. So we're hoping that you know, when we move it to online, we will be able to show a bit more of, you know, the raw data and some of the analysis. And it's possible on those pages we could link to our initiatives and actions. It's more of a matter of just how much work it might require to get that all done. That's definitely the desirable outcome. And we'll just have to see if maybe we just start with the available key indicators, and then we'll be able to, you know, continue to develop those and fill out the blanks over time.
Both for what staff are doing and what the community can do as well. So excellent report. Thank you very much. And when you're ready, Chair, I don't mind putting this on the table as a motion.
And I'd like to do that fairly soon, but I do have a couple more speakers first. Thank you. Mayor Krogh, you're next.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pan, and I appreciate, frankly, I find this extremely challenging. You know, tree canopy, relatively easy. If you think planting trees and tree canopy is a good thing, you can measure that. A lot of the other things strike me as very challenging in terms of coming up with things that the public would be able to say, oh, looking at this report, I'm satisfied you're meeting those goals. So I'm just wondering, are there any other municipalities that you're aware of that are pursuing similar strategies, and is there any sharing of information? Are they coming to us and saying, oh, you're on the cutting edge, and what are you doing to monitor? Can you give me any sense of that, if there's been any kind of communication or knowledge exchange?
Through the chair, that's a really interesting question. I think that there are a lot of cities that have been actively monitoring their progress, and we have a look at a number of examples, and very impressed with their work, just the depth and breadth of it. But the challenge that we found, and what's maybe set us apart, was that typically there were just so many indicators, and it is overwhelming, and it doesn't always give you a sense of just how well or how not well you're doing at a higher level. So what we're trying to do here is to give you both, to both have the ability to zoom out and see the big pictures and the connections, but also provide a level of details that you could use to monitor our performance. And I think in that sense, I'm not seeing really a great deal of examples for us to model. And the other aspect I think that really sets us apart is really because of the city plan framework that we set out is very bold and ambitious, and has a very clear vision about, what is that ultimate aim that we're pursuing, and that makes it both challenging and really interesting in a way that how we set those, how to quantify those end goals. And I'm not seeing a lot of efforts through other cities, like how they define those. Those are kind of the areas that there is no templates for us to follow, and so it's a lot of internal efforts and trying to figure that out. And I think that's also natural that we're trying to make this meaningful in the context of Nanaimo. So there's probably very limited kind of borrowing that we can really do, because in terms of water, in terms of what is important to our community, that's all very unique to what we defined as success.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, thank you for your patience. You're next.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Hammond's comments. When we talk about the Connected Nanaimo, there's been a lot of work already done by the Parks and Rec, especially around the Rick Hansen dollars, et cetera. So I think that's something that we could tap into that hasn't been to. I agree with there's a committee that could actually provide some background for us, as well as how well we're doing on inclusion and ways we can do it. I think we can't get too caught up on all this monitoring as well, because our staff then won't even be able to do their jobs. I think we have to look at the fact that we've got too many priorities for them, as was stated. We need to pick what they are, and then through the regular course of their work, they should be updating their charts, and that's how it gets monitored. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Geselbrecht.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the comments, and I do think that it does take a certain amount of effort for the monitoring, and especially establishing a system. I think tree canopy cover, reservoir capacity, greenhouse gas emissions, traffic-related fatalities, vacancy rate, homelessness. I think those are all very easy to understand metrics that are very trackable, and they do give you an idea of kind of where you're at and whether the money you're pouring into homelessness and safety is working or not. And I think that type of accountability is, I think people expect that, and I think that it does give us a strong foundation to make evidence-based policy decisions on. And although sometimes there is some effort in the monitoring that does need to go into it, it does allow you to make better decisions ultimately and communicate what you're trying to do to the broader public. And so I appreciate staff trying to find that balance, and also recognizing that we are leading in this, and so it does take a bit of extra capital to get it going. And I do know for sure that there's a lot of communities that are watching what we're doing, and also some like-minded communities that are also doing the same thing. So my one question, or just comments on sort of the monitoring committees and what their purposes would be. Like, I do think it's important to limit the amount of effort we're putting into committees that aren't giving the payback in terms of the feedback and the communication we're looking at. And I think that's why this council has moved away from the extent of committees that we had in the past, and even the term before that. But I do think that taking the opportunity to communicate out to the public what we're doing, and how we're doing, and then also get feedback on what our past plans have been and what our future plans are, is critical. And that's what I think the role of these monitoring committees could be, depending on how we want to divide it. So, at the very least, meeting once or twice a year where that data is presented, and then also the IAP is presented. It probably would take 2 at the minimum times to meet, so that the IAP the Integrated Action Plan, with that background context of the data, can be presented of what our future plans are, and that there's an ability for the community to provide feedback on it. And I think that's, the feedback is important, and obviously the community members aren't going to have as in-depth policy information as we are going to have. One, it builds a bit more depth at the community level in terms of understanding of what the specific policies are, but it also gives an opportunity, I think, to have a reporting out to the public, you know, the media around it, and the opportunity to like tell our story, and then get feedback on it. And I think just that's what I hope that the monitoring engagement process would play. So, and you know, how many committees would make it functional, whether it's like environment and the social foundation, or if it's all one big committee. I think those are the logistics we're going to have to think through, or if there's other means that might be a more effective route. I think we're open to hear that and have that conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Council. Good comments, and I don't see anybody else on the speakers list, and if possible, I would like to move along. We have a recommended motion. Councillor Perino is moving the recommendation.
Please.
Mayor Krog is seconding. Any other discussion needed, Council? I'm going to call the question then. All in favor of the recommendation? And any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Pan. Big job, and we appreciate your efforts. Thank you. So, Council, we're going to move on to our second report. It's under the heading of Healthy Nanaimo, and it relates to our Downtown Nanaimo Community Safety Action Plan Evaluation and Strategy Alignment. Oops, there we go. Thank you. And we'll just give Mr. LaBerge time to get settled. Mr. LaBerge, welcome. You're going to introduce our presenter.
I am. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. You'll recall back in April of last year, the Premier paid us a visit along with the Attorney General and the Solicitor General to make some announcements around public safety, and with that was some funding to develop a community safety and wellness plan. As the committee is well aware, we've done a lot of consultation with the community, and we deliberated on how we could best use that funding, and we brought a proposal to Council in June of last year that we do a number of things. One, that we have a look at our Downtown Community Safety Action Plan that was implemented about a year earlier. We wanted to see if it was meeting its objectives, if we were properly resourcing it, and if there might be opportunities to expand some of the initiatives citywide. We also wanted to have a look to see if the plan was properly aligned with other plans, including City Plan and the Youth Resilience Strategy and the Health and Housing Task Force. So with the concurrence of Council and the province, that's exactly what we did. We retained Deloitte to do that work for us, and had a very talented project team, and our team lead, Ms. Alana Best, is with us this afternoon to go over the highlights of the findings, so I'll turn it over to her.
Ms. Best, welcome.
Thank you. Really appreciate being here, and thanks for the introduction. So I won't spend too much more time talking about the background, because Dave did such a great job walking through a bit of the context here, but I would say that it was a very eye-opening and interesting project to be a part of. I, before working at Deloitte, worked for the province of British Columbia in public safety and Solicitor General, doing police modernization, Police Act work, and it was a great opportunity to be part of a project with the City of Nanaimo. So my name is Alana Best, and I am a director at Deloitte now, doing public safety consultation-based work. And we went and embarked on this project to take a look at evaluating what the Downtown Nanaimo Community Action Plan has done to date in terms of meeting its objectives and goals, as well as taking a look at their resources and making sure that they're appropriate and sustainable for what they are trying to achieve, and then also aligning with the initiatives that Dave had mentioned previously. Subsequently, we're also looking at whether or not this strategy, the resources objectives, need to be expanding beyond the downtown core. And we did work with a number of the different neighborhood associations to that extent, along with others, to inform this conversation. So in terms of the methodology, we did look at some quantitative data, including calls for service, et cetera, but largely this report is informed by a number of qualitative recommendations and research that were done. So we had conducted a number of different interviews with over 20 participants and facilitated workshops with different stakeholder groups for feedback, including select city and community safety representatives, the situation table, and framework development workshops. And we also did sessions, including with the Nanaimo Neighborhood Association, the business associations, and the community safety officers. And then also conducted 2 surveys, so one with the Nanaimo Neighborhood Association and the other with individuals with lived experience. So this is an overview of the Downtown Nanaimo Community Safety Action Plan, more for context and for a bit of a refresher. So the desired outcomes are on the top left, we were trying to achieve. And then underneath that is the strategic alignment. So where does this plan sit in alignment with the other plans that are associated with it? And part of the reason that we wanted to illustrate that is because we wanted to take a look at what other strategies, are there any gaps, are there any synergies that we need to be aware of as we're moving forward with this strategy. And then on the right-hand side are the groups of measures that we took a look at, and we're really going to use that as our methodology to walk through the evaluation process. So we'll start off with the tiered responses, go through each action, then the public spaces, and then through to the governance section. So this is a bit of a grounding slide and for the rest of the presentation. So for the measures, this is a sort of high-level view of what has been achieved and what has been accomplished. So the from the 7 out of the 14 measures were fully implemented, and you can see them listed there, and we'll go through them afterwards. 4 of them were partially implemented, including the park ambassador and the 3 governance measures. And then 2 are in progress, the parkade security, and then the crime prevention through environmental design. And then 1 was incomplete, the downtown ambassador program. So that's an overview, but we'll walk through each one of them and sort of where we're at this point and what our recommendations are to move forward. In terms of key successes, I would say this was unanimous, very strong feedback from all different types of organizations, people, individuals, through workshops, interviews. The CSO and the CLEAN team provide significant positive and overwhelming changes to the downtown Nanaimo core, and I think that came through in spades. And you'll see that as we walk through and talk about our recommendations for how to expand and what we should be, how we should be doing this moving forward. Also a strong operational coordination amongst the service providers. So certainly sort of those situation table type governance structures where we're bringing people together, and on the ground we had 2 of our Deloitte staff go along with the CSOs to and could really see how the different people that are providing services are quite coordinated and work very well together, and there's some real strength in that. And some of the key challenges that you'll also see through this is monitoring and governance, the upstream services, many of which are outside of your control, provincial, federal, government mandated pieces that significantly affect your city, as I'm sure you're all aware. And then the last one is finding the right person to help. And really, I think that centers around the complexity of what's going on, the challenges, and the various types of services and responses available to people, and how do we best coordinate and get that together so everybody understands who's the best person to be responding. Okay. So down to going through all of the various measures, we really highlighted in blue the two that we want to talk about in significant detail today, which is the CSOs, and then the next one that we'll be speaking to at the next slide is the clean teams. But I will touch maybe briefly on the various different measures, and then really highlight what we want to talk about with the CSO teams. So the Downtown Ambassador, the Downtown Ambassador program, as mentioned, was the one that was not delivered. This had been put into place 1 year prior, and through basically funding concerns and issues, was not further implemented after the strategy had been released. It did come up in the Neighborhood Association survey that this, along with the Vandalism and Relief Grant program and the resource guides, was of importance. So they did feel that this could be something that would be worthwhile to implement if funding and circumstances do arise that we're able to do so. Private security and the parkades. So recruitment, retention, and costs have been challenging in this area. We would say overall, from all of the different feedback that we received, there has been positive changes to the parkades, and there is a better sense of safety in going into parkades. So, and then we also received a little bit of feedback from those with lived experience about some negative interactions with security officers. So I think mostly a positive influence, but maybe some training, maybe some awareness with those officers as they're working with people. So more importantly, I just want to speak to and spend time about the community safety officers who have made a significant impact to the perceived safety of downtown Nanaimo. They currently, at present, have 11 FTEs, and our number one recommendation is to do with the CSOs, and we recommend expanding both the number of resources, but also the geographical location in which they are servicing Nanaimo. So we have put a number of scenarios up there for you to take a look at. The first scenario really just makes the team whole to be able to service appropriately what it's currently doing. So the number of hours that it currently does, as well as the current geographical area. The second scenario, so that would be increasing with an addition of 9 FTEs. The second scenario is increasing the hourly coverage of downtown to be 24/7. So that would be an additional 13 FTEs in the second scenario. And then the third scenario is looking to increase geographical coverage of the downtown area, which would include 30 FTEs. And then there's an additional supervisory role within those for sort of a best practices 1:11 CSO ratio in terms of the supervisors. And in addition with this, there's obviously other support needs other than just the staffing. So we provided in the report quite a bit of information on other supports that are required, such as mental health supports, as well as tech, equipment, all of those types of things that need to go hand in hand with any increases or changes to the CSOs. And then the next measure that we have is the downtown engagement team. So this was a tactical measure that was aimed at providing additional public safety supports to downtown. And staffing was a challenge for this, as I understand. And I think the RCMP and the bike squad have prioritized the downtown. They're working in other ways to ensure this is working. This has been considered to be delivered. Okay.
So if I may, Ms. Best, the three scenarios that you're referencing here, and in the coming slide, there's 2 scenarios, I believe, related to the clean team. It's not our goal today to select one of those scenarios, but in fact, the recommendation is for staff to proceed with a cost analysis of all the scenarios. Is that correct?
Maybe I'll let you respond.
Preferred scenarios, yeah.
That's correct, Chair, unless the committee would direct staff otherwise to focus on any one of the particular recommendations. But we thought we'd come back with just what everything would cost option by option.
Costing in more details, thank you, that makes sense. And I see Councillor Armstrong has a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering too, if when you were looking at this for the cost, and if we could also include the cost of new RCMP officers, because that's going to come into play as well, because I know there's going to be a request coming forward for those. So we're going to have to make some tougher decisions around that. So is it possible to be working with the OIC to see what they're going to be looking at so we can make a better informed decision?
Through the chair, we'll certainly take that back in our discussions with finance and the police.
Thank you, Mr. LaBerge.
Thank you, Ms. Best. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
Please, anytime. Thank you. So our next slide, we're talking about the clean teams, and our scenarios that we've built out here, I would say overall very positive response from all those that we engaged with in terms of the objectives of the clean teams, how they're delivering, what they're delivering, how they're working with other service providers, how they're working with those with lived experience. And the suggestion, again, the two scenarios here mimic basically scenario 2 and 3 for the CSOs, and what we viewed as the sort of a mirrored expectation to be able to have the clean teams work with the CSOs in tandem. So if you're expanding the number of hours and you're expanding geographical areas, it would also make sense to do the same with the clean team, sort of in a mirrored capacity. So currently the two-person team, Alpha and Bravo, work to provide coverage 7 days a week, but this would expand beyond that. So either 6 FTEs dedicated for sufficient coverage to downtown, or 4 additional FTEs to be able to expand geographically. Some of the challenges that we have heard in being able to do so, first of all, there's equipment challenges and procurement challenges. So just taking a look at the overall, what is required for them to do their jobs appropriately, and just making sure to include the sufficient resources to be able to procure the vehicles, procure all of the equipment, et cetera, that they need to be successful. Okay, and then the next one is the vandalism relief grant program. So the relief grant was very well received, and especially the Neighborhood Association survey indicated that. And it was brought forward to say that it was well done. It should be perhaps expanded. It should continue. I think it was very well received. So that was considered to be delivered, and I think there was lots of support if we wanted to look at continuing that. The parkade cleaners, so many participants noticed a difference, as I said, in the parkade cleanliness and how that attributes to the feeling of safety within the city of Nanaimo. And some of the engagements, participants did feel that the measure didn't go far enough. So I think grateful for what has been done, but of course would love for that to be even more so and expanded. Parkade and security improvements. So some engagement participants felt that there have been improvements, as was noted, and respondents from the Neighborhood Association survey rated the importance of the increase in coverage for security teams beyond the downtown core. So thinking about that as we move forward. So the crime prevention through environmental design. So the level of increased demands for the CSOs doesn't allow them the time to spend on projects such as this, but if we're thinking about increasing the participation and the number of CSOs, there could be a space for defining the roles and responsibilities and how to best implement this on a ground level, and be able to ensure that there is a space and ability to not only put through, but a feedback loop on how these improvements might be done in the future. Number 6, around rules and resources. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the one of the challenges that we saw was just the complexity of the situation downtown, the various number of service providers, and the ability to navigate that system. And what we found was not only the ability for those with lived experience to be able to navigate that system, but even those that are working within the service providers and their ability to do so. So this initiative was delivered. There was paper copies that were provided. There was some very tactical recommendations about posting, sort of where people can go, what sort of the rules, roles, and responsibilities, who to call, et cetera, in areas where people with lived experience frequently go to. So some pretty tactical solutions there. But I think overall it did reflect back the need for further organizational capacity and governance within sort of those service providers. And then the park ambassadors was partially delivered. So we understand that there were some union challenges that halted this program, but that it was noted by many of those in which we engaged with that being able to use parks, not just in the downtown, but across the city, was a consistent point of feedback. Many very passionate people wanting to use green space with families, with children, how they're able to do that going forward. So I would say that it was an important piece of feedback that we received, and that really reflecting the feeling of safety, the feeling of wanting to be able to use those spaces, and sort of the beauty of it, and being able to bring their families there, as well as sort of possibly increased tourism with Hello Ferry, and how your green space and parks are reflective of people that are coming in here from a tourism perspective. So looking at just the importance of that Park Ambassador program and the recommendation to continue to move forward with that, or something similar that addresses the issues within the parks as we're going forward. Okay. So the next group of recommendations is around governance. So the downtown safety coordinator, as well as the interdepartmental working group and the stakeholder committees. So these are really the measures that we honed in on and said they were partially delivered, and I think we believe that there is some area in which we can take a look at the roles and responsibilities, as well as the feedback loops and the various governance structures and how they're working together. And partially this is because public safety is not just, it's not just in one space, and it touches many different levels. It touches many different levels vertically through federal government, provincial, municipal, nations, but it covers a broad range of areas, from health, from mental health, policing, security, and so forth. So the governance structure to keep everybody in place to kind of work towards one income can be a bit daunting. With the downtown safety coordinator, we did feel that with a strategy of this magnitude and significance for the city, it is important to appropriately resource your governance structure to ensure that there is appropriate coordination, as well as getting feedback from others who need to provide into the system. The interdepartmental working group. So we understand that this was partially implemented. However, what we did receive the feedback from many stakeholders is some confusion about there being quite a few different committees that are tasked or have responsibility under public safety, and not sure how that was best being coordinated together centrally. And then the stakeholder committee challenges remained in terms of the opportunity of collective action and working towards the same North Star, and how we're bringing that feedback back to decision makers and policy makers as we move forward, as well as those who are implementing. We have a number of additional recommendations at the bottom of your screen. And those additional recommendations didn't fit naturally within any one of the measures from the strategy, but we heard overwhelmingly from a number of different engagements that these were important to share with you. So the first one was investing in alternative places to go, and we recognize and realize this isn't always within the city's control, but looking to work with partners. Things like 24-hour warming centers. So they talked often about people with lived experience not being able to be in one place, but they're really not being anywhere else for them to go to, and a structure and the infrastructure not being available to have that. So looking at that, there were many comments about the temporary fences and wanting to understanding why they were perhaps initially put up, but also feeling like it's not providing the right signal, and it's not being received well in terms of the look and feel and how the perceived safety is of Nanaimo. And then creating opportunity for positive news in the downtown. So feeling like this perpetual negative news story affecting people's perception of downtown and the safety of downtown. Okay. So this next piece, this was about the alignment. So we showed the pyramid of the various different strategies and how this aligns with the other strategies and any recommendations that were needed to go forward. So we talked a little bit about that governance, about the broad expanse of public safety and that need for a vision and a North Star, not just by one entity, but sort of from a greater, broader perspective. We did feel there were a few gaps of consideration as we move forward from this strategy, notably First Nations truth and reconciliation, preventative measures, youth-specific measures, and sort of that, what we just spoke about in terms of the infrastructure as well as the housing and that those upstream capacities. We talked already about the governance and having a coordinator and somebody working to move that strategy forward and create the synergies across the committees and governance. And then building measures and actions. So one of the things we did find within the strategy is that there were great, lofty outcomes and aspirational measures put forward, which is, I think, great and important. However, some of them are very difficult to achieve within the control of the city of Nanaimo. So they require, provincial input, they require federal input, they require other pieces. So looking at what can the city control, what is under its mandate, and then what are those baseline measures in which we can go back to say this is working, this may need improvement, this may need more resourcing. And then the communication strategy, just to finish off this slide, similarly to what we talked about, it's important for people to be aware of what the city is doing, how they're moving forward, what they have created in terms of making the city, creating more safety, creating the CSOs, doing those clean teams. I think there's a lot of good news stories in there, so how do we communicate what the city is doing? Lastly, this is our next steps and recommendations. So we suggested to coordinate with public safety partners to be able to get some alignment on that North Star and the future vision, governance framework and hires as we're moving forward to increase change and increase dealing with sort of the magnitude of the social issues. How do we create that governance structure to best align and move things forward? We talked about developing key performance indicators, and then lastly, implementing some of the recommendations that we walked through from each measures, and we would highly recommend prioritizing the CSO and the clean team expansions within those recommendations. Maybe I'll pause and see if there's questions.
I'll start, Ms. Best. Thank you very much. I'll go out on a limb here and suggest that the various components of public safety is probably the number one priority or concern for the citizens of our city. So appreciate your work on this and your recommendations. I do have a question which just stems from my own personal curiosity, because I've expressed before a bit of a frustration that this council, I don't believe, has had any representation from the Downtown Nanaimo Business Improvement Association. And I'm just curious if you, in your work here, have had any interactions with them or recommendations from them. I know that 8 or 10 years ago, they used to have a safety committee, and then their association disbanded, but has recently got back together. I don't know where they're at in terms of organization, but I'm sure that they would have some thoughts on this whole topic. So I'm just curious if you have in fact heard from them.
Chair, I can assist in advising that through the consultation Deloitte did engage all the business associations, that being the new Downtown Business Association, the Old City Quarter Association, and the Victoria Crescent Community Association, which represents the interests of the businesses there. Staff does meet monthly. Both Mr. Corson and I, we go to all their board meetings and get feedback. They do have a small safety committee, but they're still kind of in the infancy stages. They changed leadership over the last year and still trying to find some structure, which substantially explains why the ambassador program, for example, hasn't launched, because that would be initiative driven by business. So they're very much present, very much communicating with the city and just trying to really get themselves established. So they've been well consulted, and I think really the main feedback we got from them is what Ms. Best was intimating, that the CSO program, the clean teams, and really affirming the importance of maintaining safe parkade facilities, because so much of our hospitality, our hotels, our theater, the prosperity and success of their venues is really tied to people's experiences when they're parking and going into these events. Nothing spoils a holiday more than coming out of your hotel and finding your vehicle's been broken into. So we've given a great deal of attention in the last 2 years to that type of feedback from the businesses.
All right, thank you. And certainly council does hear regularly from the Old Victoria Quarter Association and the Victoria Avenue Association, what's my terminology? The Old City Quarter Association and the Victoria Avenue Association. So I hope the DNBIA gets back on its feet and is also a voice for the businesses in that area. I personally cannot give enough praise to the CSOs and the work that they do, the very difficult work that they do, to our bylaw officers who work closely with them, and also to the clean team, which I think has made a huge difference already in many areas of our city, but particularly downtown. I have some other speakers, so I'll let Mayor Krogh go next.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the report and the work of all of you. And I want to emphasize what the chair of the committee has just said with respect to the CSOs and the work they continue to do. I've been trying to find an analogy and I can't find one that really satisfies me, except that it's kind of like the management of a large swimming pool. And unfortunately, the owners still keep letting everyone to jump into the pool without any training. And we're the lifeguards, and we're being asked to save everyone from drowning, and being asked to hire more lifeguards to save more people from drowning when the numbers are overwhelming. And when everyone knows the real problem is you don't let people go swimming unless they know how to swim. And that's kind of where we're at with respect to the provincial and to some extent the federal governments with this. I expected fully that at some point the wonderful work would come back to us. The Downtown Nanaimo Safety Action Plan would come back to us essentially in the form of a request for more, because my expectation, I think the expectation of council always was that they would do good work, that they would be respected, that we would see a cleaner downtown, but it would not be enough because the number's overwhelming. So, Chair, I'm perfectly prepared to move the motion with a sense of frustration that we're having to do it, but it is, I think, for the citizens of Nanaimo, in as much as we can do something to alleviate the street disorder, this is the right thing for the city to do. I'm in your hands. I'll hold off and let someone else make the motion further down, but that's sort of where I'm at. I'm pleased and proud of all the work that's been done. I support the plan, but it frustrates me that the source of this misery is not going to get solved, as Ms. Best pointed out, the levels of government, and she pointed out very gently, I thought, the sources of the real solutions to save us from the misery that fills our streets is not going to come from the city, but we can do what we can to try and alleviate it. So, again, compliments to everyone who's doing the good work on the ground.
Thank you, Mayor Krog. I do have 3 other speakers at this point, so I'll go to them first and then come back to you possibly if you wish to put the recommendation on the table. Councillor Eastmuir.
Thank you. Through you, I just have a question about the engagement approach. My first question is about the interviews. It notes that the Public Safety Committee, there was an interview from someone representing that group. I'm just curious to hear who, am I allowed to ask who that was?
Maybe I can give you a brief overview of who we interviewed. Would that be helpful? So the Mayor's Office, Systems Planning Organization, Community Safety Officers, Nanaimo Sanitation and Clean Teams, RCMP, Nanaimo Area Public Safety Association, Public Safety Committee, Acute Response, the situation.
Okay, yeah, I've got that list. No, I'm just like, as co-chair of the Public Safety Committee, I just find it interesting that the Public Safety Committee was theoretically interviewed as part of this, and I'm not sure who would have represented the committee, but there certainly wasn't a presentation made to the Public Safety Committee, so I just find it interesting that that's on the list. And
yeah, some of them are individuals that may have represented from there, but what we promised in our interview process is that we wouldn't name any individual or any.
That makes sense. It's just, yeah, for clarity around like how the engagement process actually happened. And then for the surveys, it mentions the Nanaimo neighborhood associations, and further in the report it says 11 of 15 responded, so that's pretty good. But then it also lists individuals with lived experience. I just wondered, did you have a number of how many individuals with lived experience were interviewed?
I'd have to go back and look. Do you want me to take a look while we answer some of the other questions?
Yeah, sure. At some point, I'd certainly be interested to know, and you know, how those individuals were identified and whether it was just like on the street surveys or.
Mr. Chair, maybe I could assist through you to Councillor Eastmuir. My recollection was that we went through the staff of the warming centers and sent, I think, 10 surveys to each of the warming centers, and they were able to collect that on our behalf and return it back to the Lloyd team. So probably 20, somewhere between 20 and 30 surveys went out.
Okay, appreciate, yeah, it's always good to have a better sense of the actual numbers with the engagement, so thank you for that.
Thank you. I have Councillors Hemmons, Geselbrecht, and Armstrong. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, and I'm happy to do them in a block or however you want this to happen. Thank you. I echo the comments of the Mayor. This is a report we've been waiting for, and I think we all have this anecdotal information that the CSOs were beloved downtown, and it's great to have it quantified and qualified. I'm not sure that you can answer this. This might be for staff, but one of the big hitches we contemplated when we were creating this team was that without a lot of resources, services, housing, et cetera, to send folks to this could be quite a frustrating exercise for our CSO officers to kind of move people around when we say, you know, their intention is to connect them to services, but if those services don't exist or are already operating at capacity, that could be very demoralizing. So I'm wondering if we can have any staff comment on, is that the case? How are we perceiving that, that disconnect? Does the disconnect even exist? Maybe it doesn't, I'm not sure.
Through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, I would ask the CSO supervisor, Mr. Hornby, who's present, to maybe speak to it, but I think what I could really emphasize from my perspective is that you know, we try to provide a really broad-based support with 12 officers, meaning our initial goal was to provide 7-day-a-week coverage, 21.5 hours a day, and we realized that could barely be achieved if nobody ever got sick or took a holiday or all the other challenges. And the demand, particularly, you know, when we started the CSO program, decriminalization hadn't come in. Our homeless numbers have increased, so not only were we starting a new program, but the conditions they're working on were evolving very quickly. I can tell the committee that the CSOs have administered more than 1,500 units of naloxone and provide life-saving CPR more than 80 times in the last year and a half. It has taken an enormous toll on the officers, not just the sheer amount of work and the amount of trauma they're experiencing, but just trying to do this with very scarce resources. One of the officers was injured in an accident, has been off for about 9 months. We had to shrink the teams and the hours, and now we have another injured officer, and it's just getting tighter and tighter, and it's very difficult to have these officers working alone. So, often we have to call officers in on overtime or not have night shifts. We're asking them to staff the warming centers. The demands are very complex and they're incessant. And, I would characterize it as burning the candle at both ends. It's a very, very committed team, but we see that it's wearing, and hence the very wholesome recommendations that Ms. Beston and her team had. But maybe I would just pause for a minute and see if Mr. Hornby had anything further to add.
Mr. Hornby, welcome.
Thank you. Through to the chair, to Councillor Hemmens. The biggest challenge is when we don't have warming centers, we don't have cooling centers. It's that constant feel of, where do you want me to go? So you're balancing the public or the other citizens, and then our unsheltered population are also citizens. So we have a really good rapport with our unsheltered population, but it does get tiresome of, you can't be here, you can't be there. So you're basically not solving anything. When we have our warming centers open, we have a higher rate of compliance, where we get them out of the weather, out of the rain, out of some of our parks to get their medical needs looked at. We see less issues with burns and medical issues, because they're not trying to stay warm underneath a tarp that ends up lighting on fire, and now they have complex burn issues. So those are huge things, and it's a challenge every day to go out there, and you're dealing with, you get connections with people. It's not a them and us, it's we're all part of one giant team, and I'm proud to say that our connections we've made with Island Health make a huge difference, where we're able to share information and collaborate with them to get people in need, and get them into shelter, get their medical needs looked at, their mental health needs as well. We're not just dealing with homelessness, but the mental health aspect and the addictions, they're all intertwined. Some individuals engage in substance use to deal with their mental health issues. Some individuals have mental health issues, and to take the voices away, they engage with substances. So it's not just, and many of them have polysubstance issues. It's not just addiction, or they're homeless, or their mental health. They're all combined into one. So there are daily challenges. We have a really strong group that brings in not just the enforcement background, but it is the compassion-based approach that is making a difference, where they know that we're not there to tell them, no, you can't do this. And Ms. Best spoke about rules and regulations, and you can give a piece of paper to somebody, but they just crumple that up and throw it on the ground, instead of actually explaining why we need you not to be blocking the sidewalk, and just that we're doing welfare checks to make sure you're okay, not to necessarily get you up and moved along, but you making those connections. And then it takes months and years to get those that want help. And then the other challenge is, if they have that clairvoyant moment that they want help today, there's not the resources there to get them the help. So you've lost that aspect. So, we do a lot of, I'm proud to say we've done a lot of mental health training with the officers recently in the last couple of months, engaging with our provincial partners on mental health awareness. And because it becomes daunting every day, But the team that we have brings the social services background, not just the enforcement background. So that's been a key in hiring the officers, that they come from an outreach background, they come from a mental health background. One of my newest officers worked in the OPS and brings that in. So that continued building of an all-around team makes a huge difference in what we do.
Thank you for that response. Would you like me to go back at the bottom of the line?
No, why don't you carry on?
Thank you. This is in relation to the RCMP Downtown Engagement Team, which is not one of the priorities. I'm just curious, it says it was implemented in summer 2022 and planned for summer 2024. We want to consider implementing this measure when there's sufficient resources. I understood that council had directed funding to the downtown engagement team, so it seems like this language makes it seem like it's not a priority. Could I just have some comment on that, please?
Yes, it's through the chair to Councillor Hammonds. Thank you. That's an excellent question, and it is confusing. The initial Nielsen-Welch report, or Nielsen report suggested that the school liaison officers could be redeployed during the summer months when they were in school on working the downtown beat, and that objective was fulfilled over the next couple of years. I think what Councillor Hammonds is referring to is the additional 4 positions that Council approved a number of years ago for downtown that the RCMP were unable to fill because of the attrition and the slowdown of the police academy during COVID. The RCMP have now staffed those 4 positions, and they added them onto the REVOI team, the Repeat Violent Offender team, and they've been working targeted enforcement for about the last 6 or 9 months downtown and in some of the surrounding areas. And they've just informed us as of June of this year, they're going to redeploy 4 of those officers to work kind of the downtown beat as we had asked them to do. So the council's directions are, it took a couple of years, but the police will be fulfilling them by this summer.
Thank you. That is great to hear. One more, if I may. That's regarding the vandalism relief grant. The first bulleted recommendation is continue to provide the grant program and consider enhancing the public awareness of the program. Are we driving people to create awareness so they can apply for the vandalism relief fund? And that would indicate that it's not drawn down fully every year. So are we trying to drive more people to it, to pull from it? Or is it just that we're trying to promote that this is something that we do? 2 very different things to me, and it wasn't clear.
So definitely what we heard is to continue to offer the grant program and assure that that community outside of the downtown core could access that grant relief program. And the other piece was to review sort of the compliance and enforcement of graffiti bylaws as like a bit of a separate but subsequent tie-in to that. I would say what we heard was a little bit of both. So continue with the vandalism relief grant program, ensure that it's available beyond the downtown core, and ensure everybody knows that it's available to be able to apply for and receive it.
Thank you. So the recommendation is specific to expanding the geographical. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Geselbrock, Armstrong, and Councillor Manley, and then I'm hoping we'll be ready to put a recommendation on the floor. Councillor Geselbrock.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, first, just a big thank you to Barry, Christy, Dave, and the whole team, just in terms of the work in the Community Safety Officer Program. I know that it's been a huge effort, and there's a lot of pressure and vicarious trauma just working down there, and I'm just really proud of the work that's been done. And from all reports from all sides, there's just been a huge asset to the community. And I think just talking about that compassionate response and just hearing even the stories you're saying right now, Barry, is that we really have become it's community safety and well-being officers, and really seeing the reality of what needs to change on the streets in terms of helping people out and just the extreme lack of resources that's there. And I think that's something, you know, top of mind for myself is just like, how can we utilize what we're creating here and build that case for greater investment in terms of getting people to where they need to go. And I think we're still in a stage where there's this huge tidal wave of a problem, and right now we just don't even have the bodies to kind of like begin to grapple with just stabilizing and moving forward. And so I hear strongly the recommendations about more officers and more clean team, and I think that's something that we really seriously need to take into consideration to build that out. And I think one of my questions I have is just on the overall governance and framework and how it ties in. Like, I know that we have community safety officers. I see Christy and Dave sitting at different tables with the health and housing task force, and really there's this growing network of everybody working together on this common issue that we see the symptoms in terms of, you know, lack of community safety and then the health outcomes of individuals. So just, you know, when I was reading through the report, just around the community safety and well-being framework and how it ties into our larger committee objectives, I'm just curious if somebody could speak a little bit more of that. Is that work that we're, like, once we kind of deal with, you know, having more bodies in place, but is that work that we need to do, sort of like, how do we tie it in together so that we're sort of have a larger, better coordinated plan forward? I just, looking at sort of the recommendations here about the lack of tie-in with our official community plan, and then this framework, that I'm just confused with. Is that something that we need to develop and build out?
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht, that, you know, that's a very good question that staff have pondered and discussed with the consultants. When we look at other municipalities, and I'd like to use Victoria and Kelowna, they have management teams that are treble and quadruple what we have, and I don't know that that necessarily produces better results. But what we've found that has really changed in the last year is the amount of coordinated management of these broader problems through provincial initiatives, the acute situation table that's chaired by Ms. Wood, now the Heart and Hearth program, even Mr. Hornby's coordinated alignment with health services. I think we're doing a lot of this work very effectively with the management team that we have. But as Ms. Best said, it's, you know, these things are so very, very complex, and so much of it brushes off on areas that are beyond our control or influence, income assistance and health and housing. And I think we have excellent staff relationships. Could we do more? I suppose just more management assets could make us that much more strategic, but I think we're doing a very good job. I know, Ms. Wood, if you have any other comments.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrecht. I think too, when we look at community safety and wellbeing plans, I think maybe the committee is aware that in Ontario and Quebec, they kind of mandate municipalities to do community safety and wellbeing plans, and they provide them the funding. In this particular case, the provincial government here awarded us the $75,000, and as Mr. Lurberge said, was to start a community safety and wellbeing plan. But we've been kind of ahead of that curve compared to other communities. We're really unique with City Plan because we've kind of incorporated all of these goals together into one plan that includes healthy goals in there as well. And you know, I've been here several times talking about upstream, midstream, downstream work. And so, you know, the City Plan really envisions a lot of that work that needs to be done upstream. And of course, we've done that work around the gun and gang prevention work, you know, looking upstream again with youth and doing that work as well. And then the Health and Housing Action Plan. We've had all of that stuff in place, whereas other communities haven't. And those are the things that they would be looking at when they're building a community safety and wellbeing plan. And so we, of course, didn't want to go back to the community again and say, can you tell us about your public safety issues? Because I think we've kind of done that over the last few years. And so that's why it was important to incorporate looking at the strategy alignment to see where there were gaps and where we might be able to kind of, you know, fill in those gaps. But that's essentially what you would do in a community safety wellbeing plan, is to do that consultation, that engagement, look at health issues, look at housing, look at public safety. And we've just kind of done it a little bit in a different framework.
So the thing that's mentioned in here is really what the province was saying that you need to do, and this is the money for it. And, you know, a lot of that we've already done, and this kind of review sort of emphasizes, you know, that there's gaps in that. And another question I have is just in terms of like looking at the expenditure of hiring more CSOs and the clean team, looking at like the health impacts of folks with open wounds and no place to go on the medical system, and just looking at sort of like our prioritization of capital expenditure. What really screams to me is that like there needs to be some type of daytime use warming center set up in Nanaimo that we can start building out, that we know that there's a place that we can bring people, and then tie that in with this whole coordinated access process and building out from there. And I guess just, is there any comment on that? Is that something that, you know, when we look at our capital priorities, this seems to be like a really big gap, and is that anything to do with the recommendations coming forward? Because I think that, yeah, it looks like a major need to, you know, from my perspective.
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbach, I think we've also talked a little bit. I do plan to come back to council with an overview on this past winter season. And there may be some options for council to consider when we're talking about future use of warming centers or some of that work. But I hope to provide a really good overview of what happened, as well as, we've been able to collect impact from neighborhoods and, some of our partners that we work with, and where the successes are, where some of the lessons are that we've learned. How much in total was used, including, our emergency management, climate readiness funds, the funds we received from Island Health and the city funds. So I think that may help inform some of your decisions moving forward on this topic.
Okay, thank you. And just another question, just in terms of like the recent changes that were just announced like on Friday from the provincial government in terms of open drug use, is that, does it look like that would change sort of like the level of effort and demands on our CSOs going forward, or reduce, or it's pretty tough to tell exactly what that implications would be?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Gesselbach, it's too early to tell, but we can certainly say that decriminalization's been here for a year, and the behaviors and patterns are well established, and we know that any reimplementation of criminalization is going to come with instructions to the police to be very discerning, particularly when it comes to public drug use. So there will be a new enforcement role, but albeit checked or measured. And I think what's really significant about the CSO program in the municipality is that we manage public space, and this is all occurring in public space, and the resources that are required to keep our sidewalks and our parks clean, safe, accessible, flowing. That's what the Clean Team and the CSO programs are about, and I would say that demand is going to continue to be consistent regardless of whatever direction the province chooses to go.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Ms. Best, for the presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, you're next.
Thank you. One of the points that was mentioned was about the issues with the grants and not people accessing them outside of the downtown area. One of the main reasons for that is because the motion was specifically just for downtown, which is why I voted against that. Will we require a new motion so that other people can do that, or will that be done at the budget deliberation time?
I suspect that's going to be covered under one of the options that staff will bring forward, but Mr. LaBerge, can you respond?
Thank you, Chair. To Councillor Armstrong, if you recall, this was a discussion point when the grant program was brought back to council on a motion by Councillor Eastmere. The program is going to be funded until 2026, and the discussion was whether to expand the program beyond the downtown area. At that point, staff did point out that the provincial government now has a $10.5 million program for vandalism relief that any business can apply to. So there are some grant options available to people outside of the downtown core. The funding currently is $30,000 a year, and all of that's been spent every year downtown, and probably if we sent that citywide, it would probably exhaust very early in the year would be our expectation.
And just as a follow-up to that, because I do hear from many businesses, they find it very unfair that they're paying just as much taxes and in some cases even higher, and having to hire private security because they feel they're not being treated fairly. So that was just one comment. And then my second comment, with your with the recommendation, the business case is for to expand it to other parts of the city. Is that correct?
Through the chair, there's a number of recommendations. I think the first one is kind of a status quo. What type of resources, staff resources we'd need to continue the services downtown. Option 2 is to expand that to 24-hour service downtown, and option 3 is to expand it to other areas of the community as well. Is that correct, Ms.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and that's just because I do hear from a lot of businesses, they find it's grossly unfair that they're having to pay for private security and other people aren't. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Manley, and then I'll be turning to Mayor Krogh for the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the team. Thank you for the report. Thank you to the team for all the work that you're doing in the community around this issue. It's not, it's something we hear a lot about, and I really appreciate the compassionate approach of the CSOs. I'm curious about the interaction or the questions with the neighborhood associations. I know that some of them would like to see the CSO program expanded, and I think, you know, scenario 1 or scenario 2, focusing on the downtown scenario 2, we might be seeing more people moved off into the surrounding neighborhoods and have more of an effect on those surrounding neighborhoods. And I'm curious about what the feedback was from the neighborhood associations in the surrounding areas.
Yeah, so the neighborhood associations, there's very high uptake in terms of wanting the CSOs to expand. And I would say even more so on the clean teams aspect of it. So very, very large support for both. I think they also see you have an incredible CSO team. I work with other municipalities and other communities and who are leery or thinking about CSOs and how to implement it. And through this experience, I just can't emphasize enough how well they're respected by those with lived experience, those who are providing services, and as well as the other community associations. And I think what they're saying is that it's the issues that we're seeing are not just concentrated to downtown, and that's changing and spreading. And so they feel that there's a responsibility to move beyond that and to take care of sort of the larger picture in Nanaimo. So both supportive of both of those recommendations.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think it is a great program, and it's probably something we do really need to expand because the problems aren't going away anytime soon. Not without a lot of help from senior levels of government. And with that, I'll happily move the motion.
I promised the mayor that I would come back to him. Mayor Krogh.
I bring no ego to this. Councillor Manley's moved, I will second.
Sorry, your microphone was not on, so try again.
Sorry, I bring no ego to this, Chair. Councillor Manley's moved, I will happily second.
So I'm hearing moved by Councillor Manley, seconded by Mayor Krogh. And just for the benefit of viewers, allow me, if I may, to read the recommended motion so that everybody can hear it. And that is motion that the Governance and Priorities Committee, that's us, recommend that Council direct staff to proceed with a cost analysis of the preferred scenarios found in the Downtown Nanaimo Community Safety Action Plan Evaluation and Strategy Alignment Report dated 2024 April 29 for the expansion of the Community Safety Officer and Clean Team programs and to prepare a business case for 2025 budget deliberations. That has been moved and seconded. And unless there is comment, which will be very brief, Councillor Perino.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you so much. Excellent report. I don't think there is any team better than what we have right here between bylaw enforcement and Christy Wood and, you know, the CSOs. But I have a real problem with this. And that is, we just this morning passed our bylaws for a 7.7% tax increase. If we were to agree to an additional possibly 30 CSOs and 10 more members of the clean team, I shudder to think what the tax number will be for next year. And not one perspective from the provincial government as far as what can be done for those people who are so desperately ill from this horrible, horrible disease of drug addiction. You actually have a picture in here that you've got one of our CSOs officers, it's standing over, or leaning over someone who is obviously near death. And all we're doing is basically just keeping them alive and then sending them back out there. There's no discussion about anything to do with their health and what might possibly save them for the long term and give them a better possibility of life. I just feel like we have asked our taxpayers to pay for more police, more fire, more CSO, more clean teams, more warming centers, more shelters, more vandalism grants. It goes on and on and on, and nothing is improving the story. I just can't endorse yet more money and less help from the province. I just can't. I can't endorse it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Perino. While I didn't have that exact approach, I did have a note in my report that as we're contemplating further investments, I think we need to be really clear about the dollar figure we're putting in, so we politically can communicate that to the provincial government. I think that's going to be very important. So I'm fully in support of the recommended motion, but understanding what we're paying for that the government is not paying for is going to be very important for us telling our story in this. Thank you.
Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. And you know, to that point, like this report on its own, the province gave us $75,000 to do that. And I don't know what the report actually ended up costing, like the final figure, but like that's just a sense of like the amount of money it takes. And that's not even going to include all of the staff time and resources that will go into creating the business cases. And I do wonder if like narrowing the scope and just like taking out scenario 3 might, you know, alleviate some of the staff time that could be that might be needed for this, because I just think at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, it's not going to be financially feasible for us to expand the CSO program to the entire city. Like, because that's almost creating like our own municipal bylaw police force, and it's just like a bottomless pit of resources, and it's the most sort of downstream of things, and for all of the reasons that have been explained so far. So I guess I'm happy to support this, but I also feel sorry for staff for the amount of like time and resources that will go into this, because when the conversation comes forward, we're going to be at a really tough point of like, yeah, we'd love to invest in this, but the resources are just beyond the scope of what we have available. So I'm supporting it, but like reluctantly, because ultimately we know how much it's going to be.
Thank you, and I'll just add that I agree with the comments, and I'll certainly be supporting this recommendation, largely because we need a cost analysis of the various scenarios so that we can make a good informed decision, and it will be a tough decision, but we need to have that information in front of us. So on that note,
sorry,
Councillor Geselbrock.
Thank you. No, I think the comments of Councillor Perino are bang on, and I think, as Councillor Thorpe said, just the cost analysis would be very useful, and I think in that, and it speaks to a bit of the report on terms of the monitoring of the program, is just, you know, by having this program, are we alleviating RCMP costs? Are we, you know, the degree that a sense of safety and security has improved in the community, and the report spoke to this as well, and anecdotally that has really come back strongly. I think are useful things to have this in mind, because basically, you know, with the drug crisis and the homelessness, we're in the bottom of a hole, and I think really demonstrating how the CSO program is an important aspect of the steps to dig ourselves out of it, even though it's like a, way downstream. I think it is, just what are the way, how demonstrating how it's helping us dig our way out. Thank you.
All right, Council, I think we're ready to call the question on this recommendation. It has been moved and seconded, so I will ask all in favor, please. And any opposed? And I note Councillor Perino opposed. Thank you very much. That passes. Ms. Best, thank you for your work on the report. Ms. Wood, thank you. And of course, our Public Safety Director, Mr. LaBerge, thank you for your good work. Mr. Hornby, please take back to your colleagues, Council's gratitude for the work you're doing in very tough conditions and for the compassionate way in which you carry out that work. Thank you very much. And we're right at break time. Ms. Gurry is nodding enthusiastically, so this committee will take a break until 3. Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, and move right into our next report, which involves the keeping of poultry in residential areas. I'm going to just warn committee members that I'm going to be very tough on this, and I will be possibly fining anybody who cracks any bad yolks during this topic. Sorry, but I wanted to put that out there right now. Let's get that off the table, because, well, no.
Is the chair saying let's get cracking?
Yes, I knew that would start something. No, it is an issue that is important to people, and I don't mean to make light of it. So I'm going to turn things over before I get into more trouble to Mr. Holm, Director of Planning and Development, who's not wearing a funny hat.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this item, and I'll just say a couple of quick words and then turn it over to Ms. Lania Rowett, Manager of Current Planning, to provide a presentation. So what's presented here is an overview of existing regulations as they apply to poultry on residential properties, keeping of poultry, and specifically here, the policies of City Plan regarding food security are considered in relation to the existing regulatory framework that allows for the keeping of small flocks for ancillary use on residential parcels. And I'll be happy to turn over to Ms. Rowett now. Thank you.
Ms. Rowett, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you and good afternoon. I was going to switch gears from our previous topic, a very significant topic as well, be honest, but I chickened out a little bit on a joke. So moving forward, just wanted to provide a bit of background here. As you recall, last fall, Council did pass a motion to direct staff to look at the animal control bylaw and zoning bylaw to regulate, regarding the regulation of keeping poultry, specifically on large residential properties. And this was just keeping in mind opportunities to further support food security. And a lot of this, this review did stem from a number of inquiries and calls for service that the city did receive a significant increase in last year. Household poultry, or backyard chickens as commonly referred to, has been permitted on residential lot properties in Nanaimo since 2010, and generally with few known issues. Other than, as I said last year, the prompting for this review. Following Council's direction and looking at these opportunities for regulatory considerations, we met internally with other departments, and so today here obviously we're representing planning and development because we deal with our zoning bylaw, which is a land use bylaw, but also this leads into our bylaw enforcement, and Dave LaBerge, Director of Public Safety, is here as well. There is also a number of external agencies that have a role in animal health and welfare and food security, including BCS BCA and the BC Egg Marketing Board. Looking back at a bit of history on our regulatory bylaws, there have been a number of amendments already to city bylaws to regulate household poultry. These include changes that were made, as I noted briefly, in 2010 to allow poultry on residential properties. And this started out with up to 2 chickens on lots that were less than 450 square meters, and up to 4 chickens on properties that were 450 square meters or greater, but less than 1 acre. Larger flock sizes were permitted on properties greater than an acre, but that was on the assumption that the use of the property was still primarily residential. So keeping of chickens was ancillary to that. It wasn't a commercial operation. And it's important to note that because ungraded harvested eggs can only be used or sold to the end consumer, not for commercial sale. In 2011, the licensing and control of animals bylaw was amended further, and this was done in consultation with community as well as the Nanaimo Poultry Collective, I believe. And there was an increase in the number of chickens that were permitted to be kept on residential properties. So instead of 2 and 4 chickens, it was increased to 4 and 6. So up to 4 chickens on the smaller lots and up to 6 chickens on lots that are greater than 450 square meters but less than an acre. At the time, the animal control bylaw was silent on the maximum number of chickens over 1 acre. However, the zoning bylaw did continue to consider that keeping of chickens on residential properties to be an ancillary use, not permitting commercial operations. Most recently in 2021, you may recall the update of the licensing and control of animals bylaw being replaced with the animal responsibility bylaw, and that's what we have now. And through that amendment, there was an introduction of a maximum flock size for the larger residential properties. And in the bylaws, this refers to a property that is sized 4,000 square meters or greater, with a limit of 12 chickens being permitted. Total of 12 animals. So if just chickens, 12 chickens, but total 12. Thank you. And this bylaw also does include other provisions for restrictions on roosters being prohibited, as well as providing direction on minimum enclosure requirements and other health and environmental regulations in the bylaw. The intention really through these regulations is to, identify manageable flock sizes for household keeping. And our current regulations, as I noted, the Animal Responsibility Bylaw and our current zoning bylaw, which was introduced in 2011, do have, just on screen, I've got identified the zones that currently permit residential use and would allow for keeping of chickens, as I noted earlier, the 4 and 6 being on the small, mid-size properties, and then up to 12 poultry, if no other animals, on larger properties. There is a distinction from keeping of chickens on these residentially zoned lots and the keeping of chickens in more of an agricultural commercial scale on properties where agriculture is a permitted use, and those would be in our rural resource AR1 zone and our urban reserve AR2 zone. In those cases, of course, part of an agricultural operation, there is no limit to the number of chickens. This distinction aligns with land use policies in our official community plan, city plan, as well as our regional growth strategy, which support local food production and household self-sufficiency within urban areas, but also protect rural resource lands for the more intensive agricultural operations. Small flocks aren't critical to community-wide food security. This is really addressed through the larger operations, and we understand through BC Ag Marketing Board that there are 9 commercial operations throughout Vancouver Island, 200,000 laying hens, and those are the source of community-wide food security. So thinking about more of that household flock size, staff did review a number of other municipalities and their animal responsibility bylaws, both on Vancouver Island as well as throughout BC, and noted that Nanaimo's regulations are similar to, if not more permissive, than comparable jurisdictions. Flock sizes generally are scaled to the size of properties, with fewer chickens permitted on smaller residentially zoned lots, and of course, more or unlimited numbers on rural residential lots or lots where agriculture is a permitted use. It's important to note also that it's difficult to provide a direct comparison between Nanaimo and other jurisdictions. Of course, each bylaw is informed by the local context, perhaps some of the opportunities or issues or constraints that are faced there, and that has informed each jurisdiction's regulations. On here we can see, for example, neighboring municipality of City of Parksville does not allow poultry on lots that are less than 1,000 square meters, so more than double where we would allow 4. And a maximum of 4 poultry are permitted on lots that are greater than 1,000 square meters. And I just wanted to note too that when you look even broader beyond this to larger urban centers, for example, I noted that City of Vancouver, they administer permitting for chickens, but really that is to allow opportunity to monitor locations within the city, advise of any potential outbreaks. So in terms of, again, the thought of finding what is suitable for your community in terms of a scale of keeping of chickens on residential lots, and also what might be potential administration that might be needed with that. So just for some points of discussion, staff reviewed the opportunities for various approaches to proceed in a manageable way that could support household food security and our city plan policies. And based on Council's direction, we identified 3 options to proceed. One would be to potentially look at increasing the allowable number of poultry or animals on a property to greater than 12. This could allow for increased flexibility and also household self-sufficiency. It's already, as I already presented, Nanaimo is already similar to or more permissive than other jurisdictions. And as I'll go into a little bit more in the next slide, it's important to consider what that maximum number of poultry would be, if there is a maximum, and keeping in mind what is appropriate or necessary to mitigate potential conflicts between residential properties, and keeping flock sizes manageable. So there are standards of nutrition, animal welfare, sanitation, or veterinarian care, and managing things like odor, noise, attraction of pests and predators in urban areas. Another opportunity, another approach that staff identified is reducing the allowable number of poultry on a property. And when I'm speaking to this, I should clarify, I am referring to the larger residential lots, so those that are greater than 4,000 square meters, but are residentially zoned. So in this case, if we were to reduce to less than 12, this may potentially address some of the land use conflicts and complaints that the city has received, particularly in recent time. It may be seen as being overly restrictive and limiting, potentially, opportunities for household self-sufficiency. Another approach would be to maintain existing allowances, and this is actually where staff is recommending to the Governance and Priorities Committee, is to continue to allow the 4, 6, and up to 12 chickens, depending on property size, but proceeding with some clarification in our bylaws, as working with our bylaw enforcement partners, understanding that for the public or anyone who may not be as familiar with our regulations, there is the animal responsibility bylaw, and it defines poultry distinguishes poultry and offers definitions of that term from livestock And so being more clear in our bylaw about, to align with the animal responsibility bylaw, we are suggesting some amendments could be introduced, and I'm going to go through those quickly. But maintaining these allowances would continue to reinforce household food security, as well as protecting or guarding any potential risks to community food security. And that would be by maintaining appropriate flock sizes in residential areas. So as we consider these three approaches, there's a number of themes that we would advise the committee and council to consider. Obviously, the potential, if we were to look at increasing flock sizes on residential lots, there is a potential for land use conflicts. I already spoke to the advice of organizations such as BC Ag and BCS-BCA for best practices to maintain manageable flock sizes. And really, I think when we spoke with these agencies, the concern for poultry in urban areas centered around the potential for the ease of the spread of disease and how to manage that between neighboring flocks and ensure that there is things like an appropriate mechanism for disposal of waste or mitigating any disease spread to nearby commercial operations. And the commercial operations are critical to protect, as I mentioned, because they do supply our food security here from an egg production standpoint and chickens on Vancouver Island. Small personal flocks are not inspected by a BC Ag or the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So again, the concern that if they were improperly managed, that could pose a risk. And as mentioned previously, we have had instances of negative impacts from the larger flock sizes in residential areas, as you're aware. Other considerations would be the end-of-life care for chickens as they age, and I wasn't aware until I participated in this review, but chickens can live up to 14 years or even longer, so it is an important consideration. So as recommended, staff would recommend that we maintain the existing allowances for keeping of chickens on the larger residential properties, but proceeding with some clarifications in the zoning bylaw, first of all. And this would be to better clarify the distinction between household keeping of poultry from agriculture, which is a commercial, meant to be considered as a commercial use. So in the definition of agriculture right now, we refer to the growing, rearing of agricultural products, raising of livestock, but for clarity, just to insert or poultry. It has always been meant to and been interpreted to include that, but again, for the public or anyone reading our bylaws, it would be helpful to align this with the language in our animal responsibility bylaw. And then second to that would be, as I mentioned earlier, introducing into the zoning bylaw some definitions for livestock and poultry that align with the bylaw. And I think with that, might proceed further with with questions. But really, the intent that this recommendation is meant to provide is that staff would recommend that this would still continue to support household food security or self-sufficiency, gives an opportunity for very small-scale husbandry of animals and educational opportunities, the themes that are within our city plan policies, but it does take into consideration some very serious impacts that could arise if small flocks are not properly managed in residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rowlett. I see Councillor Armstrong has a question. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. My question's about, you said that we have no ability to inspect the smaller ones. So if there was a case, let's say avian flu or something that spread to a commercial, would we be liable because of our policy of not having any inspections?
No, we would not be liable as far as I would understand that.
Thank you.
Chair to Councillor Armstrong, in our discussion with BC Ag, what they emphasize is there's about 200,000 commercial laying hens on the island. That's what provides food security as far as poultry for Vancouver Island residents. What we're talking about here are hobbyists that produce eggs for their own households. They explain that none of these small household operations are inspected by the Food Inspection Agency, and significantly say that if any egg product through gate sales or any other means goes off that farm, that will have impacts on commercial farms at both a 1 kilometer radius and a 10 kilometer radius, meaning that if a household flock was found to be diseased and some of the products left that property, it could potentially close down or impact those commercial operations, the 200,000 laying hens that we truly rely on. And that was kind of their main emphasis in discussion with staff on why we shouldn't be, as a community, looking at commercial operations from households because they're not inspected, and they actually undermine the security, food security, as opposed to supporting it unless those products are consumed within the household.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
Thank you. Council, I note that we do have a delegation on this topic, but I'll entertain other questions of Ms. Rowett first, if there are any. I'm not seeing any at this point. I would appreciate clarification, Ms. Rowett, on the subject of roosters, because most of the complaints that I've seen come to council have nothing to do with chickens per se. It's the roosters and the noise they make. And maybe I'm misreading it, but under your recommendation, number 2, including a definition of livestock and or poultry, under poultry it does seem to include roosters. So can I ask for comment on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. Just to clarify, the animal responsibility bylaw does not permit roosters. The definition clarifies the types of animals that would be considered to be either livestock or poultry. However, there are regulations within the bylaw that go on then to prohibit roosters on residential properties.
That explains that for me. Thank you very much. Councillor Manley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the bylaw specifically states that this is for residential use only. It's not for commercial operations. So people selling eggs would be in contravention of the bylaw. Is that correct?
Technically, yes. Thank you through the chair. This is a commercial scale operation would be different than this is intention in the bylaw is for household consumption, personal consumption only.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question. Dogs have licenses, obviously city licenses. Is there any kind of licensing for residential, for residences to have?
Through the chair, no, there isn't, Councillor Perino.
Thank you.
Right, I'm not seeing any other questions for staff at this point, so I will ask our delegation to come forward. Mr. McCrory, welcome. Yes, if you'll just use that podium there, the microphone is on, and if you would introduce yourself to start with, and then we'll give you 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. My name is Colin McCrory. I'm a retired university music professor from VIU, and I live on Uplands Drive next to one of the properties in question that this is all about. My tale today is going to be, I guess, somewhat personal because I don't have experience beyond what goes on next door. So what I want to do is describe what happens in a scenario where the bylaw is not enforced, where the neighbor in question is allowed to do whatever he pleases, in fact.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify with the delegation that he won't be mentioning any names or addresses of the neighbor in question, just because that is their personal information. So if he could keep it general and just be speaking about
Absolutely.
his neighbor. Thank you so much. I
My
just wanna-
neighbor.
Thank you.
That works,
Thanks,
right?
Ms. Gurry.
Yes, thank you.
Please, go ahead.
A little intro, a little history behind the land in question. These lots are all at the top of the old Uplands Hill, which comes off of Departure Bay Road. You know where that hill is. You go up there before you get to Upland School. Well, they were all originally subdivided and designated as VLA lots, Veterans Land Act lots. My father got the right to buy that lot in the 60s because he fought in the Second World War. And that's how those lots were all sold on both sides of the street, even though you don't see it that way now. They're all subdivided. After 10 years, people were allowed to subdivide. So the opposite side of the road from us, they're all much smaller lots. But several of us have maintained the original 1.6 acres that came with it. Okay, the home has been in my family since it was built in 1966. My dad died in '88. We later moved in with my mom and looked after her, and she passed in 2003, and we worked out a deal with the rest of the siblings, and we are still enjoying the home with qualifications. The neighbor moved in a number of years ago. He enjoyed the property he moved into. It was a beautiful piece of property. I know the previous owners. They had taken wonderful care of it, beautiful pool. Everything was great for a number of years, but then things changed. I put in a new fence because we were having deer issues. I asked him if he would contribute. No, I can't afford to do that right now. Well, we have our own garden, so the deer were coming through from his side, so what the heck, we put the fence in anyway. Well, about 2 months later, I go into the backyard and there's a chicken wandering around. Asking him, what gives here? Well, he's starting a little operation using my fence as part of it. Okay, a dozen chickens, we were fine. Huh. It didn't stop there. He started to sell them, and he started to add more and more chickens. The operation became quite large. I'm having to shorten this here. We got the city involved, animal control. Well, the more of them that were there, the more chickens he got, and the more he dug in his heels. So we are dealing with smell that is unbelievable, flies, hundreds of flies in your yard. You can't eat in your backyard because flies, right? Noise at a level that is hard to believe because he's a workaholic, and not that that's a criticism, but his idea of work is running a machine and pushing dirt around in his yard.
Mr. McCrory, sorry, 1 minute left.
Yeah, I see it. So we've been dealing with noise that's been unbelievable for the past 2 summers, and he doesn't stop. He starts at 9 a.m. and he runs it all day long. Dust, doesn't matter. Then came the roosters. You suspended the bylaw right about when he got the roosters going, and I haven't had a decent night's sleep in 7 months. The rooster is 40 feet from my bedroom. I don't know how they deal with it. In short, this is what happens when a bylaw is not enforced. This is the kind of thing that can happen, and it can happen to obviously anybody in this scenario. That's why you have zoning. That's why you have agricultural areas. That's where this belongs, not where all of us live.
And I'll just have to ask you to wrap up.
Yep. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, staff. Great job. I want to leave it on a positive note. through this process, I have learned a lot about the city. I thank you, councillors and mayor, for your responses to my emails, for your returning my phone calls. I want to thank my neighbors for support in bringing this forward. And maybe most of all, I've met some great staff people. There's some wonderful folks that work for Nanaimo. They do their job really well, right from animal control on to talking to noise bylaw people, all the way through it. You're to be proud of the people that work for you. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate your comments, Mr. McCrory. Thank you very much for those kind words. Don't go too far, because I see a number of questions for you from councillors.
Okay.
Now that you've buttered us up, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. My question through to you, and thank you. Great presentation. Do you know approximately how many chickens your neighbor has and how many roosters he has?
He got to 150 and he stopped bragging about it. He kept adding.
Okay.
And he has kept adding. And if you check his Facebook page, he's got hens with bunches of chicks, and this doesn't stop. He wants to run a full commercial operation. He's selling the eggs.
And how many roosters?
Two, I think.
Okay.
I know about the one that's next to my bedroom.
Yeah, you're friendly with him. That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
I was just going to ask how many chickens as well, but thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Mayor Krog.
I was going to ask the same question, but I just want to thank Mr. McQuarrie and the others, his supporters, if you will, his spouse and neighbors too, for coming out today. I'm a great believer in rules, and rules are designed to allow us to live in harmony in a community, and this is, by every definition, a commercial operation in a residential area.
And none of the rest of us can enjoy our yards. There's 6 homes that butt up to this place because Sunrise Crescent is right there. We don't get to use our yards in the summertime.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask about how many chickens as well, but you're also dealing with other issues related to this. You have a pool that's right beside?
I have a pool that's between my bedroom and, yeah, I never would have put that in. My father did in the 70s. But I now have 5 grandchildren, 4 and under, in the neighborhood. It's wonderful to be able to share this with my family. It's not doable because of the smell. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, I see no other questions. I don't see Councillor Armstrong's hand up. I don't believe. It's hard to tell. No. Thank you. Thank you very much again, Mr. McQuarrie, for making us aware of this and for your time this afternoon.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So, Council, we're back to our recommended motion. If there are any further questions of staff, we can deal with those. Otherwise, I'll look to put the recommendation on the table. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Thank you. Yeah, just some comments. First, with the number of chickens, I think 150 in somebody's backyard with a bunch of neighbors around is definitely over the reasonable limit. And I think I would really like to have our bylaw designed in a way where at the center is the enjoyment of your property. So excessive smells and sounds that are intruding on your property is sort of what the bylaw is intention to limit. And I think it's pretty clear in that case there, on 1.6 acres, 150 chickens plus roosters, it far exceeds what would be reasonable in that type of residential area. I think at the lower end, 4 chickens, 6 chickens, depending on the size of the property, 10, 20, is all within reasonable bounds. And I think the current bylaw is saying 4 chickens, and then if it's a certain size, 6 chickens. Although other municipalities have similar ones, I think it's relatively arbitrary numbers, whether it be 5 or 10 or or whatnot. And I think there has been requests from the community to be allowed to have more chickens at the lower end, not by exponential amount, like 150, but I'm talking about from 4 to 5, you know, for the smaller things, or from 6 to 10. And I know there's a lot of properties around that have that number and you don't hear anything about it. The complaints that we've been having mostly center around roosters, and then large-scale operations, like specifically in that area. I think I'm aware of 2 other complaints in town revolving around roosters. So for me, what I think would be reasonable, addressing the issues of the complaints, but then also of folks that would like to have a few more roosters or a few more chickens and be in compliance, would be to adjust those numbers at the lower end to, like, say, on the smallest properties, 5 chickens, you know, from a 1/4 acre to 1 acre, 10, from 1 acre and 1 acre property to 2 acres allow 20. And then from 2 acres up, I don't know, maybe 50 or whatever. I think it'd be a very small number that would fit into that 2 acre area. And not to throw anything off from the fly. Around roosters, you know, I think not allowing them when residential areas, there's some 2 acre property where maybe it's not an issue where there is a sound of a rooster, and are there accommodations for that to occur? And I'm curious. In the past, have we in Nanaimo always had a blanket not allowed roosters ever? Doesn't matter what size your property. Like in the last 40 years, 30 years.
Mr. Lindsay.
Through the chair, so my recollection, I'll look to staff here who can correct me, but my recollection is when we first went and looked at the issue of allowing for chickens in residential properties, so they're ancillary to residential. It was only within the last maybe decade and a half or so that we first did that, and at the time, it was understood right from the start that no roosters would be allowed as part of that. So that was one of the rules right from the start of first allowing chickens on a residential properties.
Okay, thank you. And then from my understanding, up until the animal responsibility bylaw, we did not have a limit on the number of chickens allowed on 1 acre plus land.
Through the chair, that's correct. It still meant that the use of the property needed to comply with the zoning bylaw. So keeping of chickens was ancillary to the residential use.
Right. So it would not be allowed. You would not be in compliance if you were selling commercially eggs from your 1 acre property, even though technically you were allowed to have 150 chickens. You still weren't allowed to use it as a commercial property, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Pardon? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I'll just add to it and a bit of the history on how we arrived or what considerations were given when arriving at the lower number of hens permitted with respect to egg production. So there was a very coordinated group at that time that really led the push, the interest in allowing for urban poultry for egg production in the city and the husbandry and all the good things that go along with that. And actually the numbers were arrived at a little bit conservatively at first, and then increased, as Ms. Rowett mentioned in her presentation, to support egg production that would generally align with would be ancillary and support the needs of family on the property. So there was consideration to the number of chickens and producing eggs sufficient to support family needs, and as well as looking at the turnover in the chickens as they sort of age out of egg production. So those were factors that were considered in the numbers that are currently in the bylaw. I just wanted to add clarification there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. I have Councillors Manley, then Mayor Krog, then Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Mr. LeBerge about complaints. I know we received emails about two separate farms, the one in Uplands, which we received a lot of emails about, and one down on 9th Street in an area that was traditionally agricultural area, and it's a 2.5 acre property. Have there been complaints about that property since we passed this motion?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley, there is not, and I do actually have a summary of calls from our Animal Control Service regarding poultry for the last 3 years, if the committee would be interested in hearing them.
Sure, yeah, I think it's, I know I visited both of these farms, egg operations, and I know that the person down in the south end was looking to comply with the regulations as much as possible, and was interested in making sure that their neighbors were happy about their situation. But yeah, I'd be interested in those statistics.
Go ahead, Mr. LeBerge.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do believe the original complaints on the south end property was regarding roosters. Our animal control providers advised in 2024 they've received 10 calls to a year, 4 of them for poultry at large, meaning getting out of the yard, 4 for keeping a rooster, and 2 for an excessive number of hens or ducks. One of them was one of the subject properties you described. Will say that in 2024, if they receive poultry complaints, they just direct callers to the city. So that's an incomplete number of calls, because I know my staff get them on a weekly basis. In 2023, there were 39 calls. Would say that probably half of those were for poultry at large, and another large number for keeping roosters, and then 4 for excessive numbers of hens or ducks, and then another 4 for coop violations, meaning where they've positioned it and how they maintained it. And then in 2022, there were 26 calls. Again, probably a third of them were for poultry at large, another third for keeping roosters, and then the remaining third for violations with respect to the maintenance of the coops.
And so were these on a number of different properties, or are we just talking about a few properties where all these calls are generated from?
Through the chair, sometimes 2 or 3 successive calls would be to one property, but for the most part, these are all at unique properties.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. And just a question to staff to confirm my understanding. So it's for poultry on lots less than 450 meters squared, correct? Which is about 5,000 square feet?
Correct. Thank you.
So if you want to talk about putting 6 or more on theirs, and you think of the average lot size in this community where it's at, that would be a pretty substantive increase. Anyways, my position on this is fairly clear. I think the recommended motion is appropriate and fair. And I appreciate, that the concept of food security and raising our own critters and all those things is very, very appealing. But we know what the reality is for people who live in residential neighborhoods. You live in a city for a reason. If you want to live in the country, you live in the country for a reason. And I think you have to be reasonable. If someone wants to apply for a variance down the road, if they're already producing somewhere, so be it. But I am much moved by the issues around food security, believe it or not, because if there is an outbreak of some kind, the potential ramifications for poultry production on the island would be incredible. You're talking about slaughtering entire flocks all over the place, potentially, which would really damage food security as it exists. So I say let's get on with the recommended motion, and also let's get on with, I think, moving for a period where council is quite clear about our expectations from staff instead of leaving them out there right now with an unclear direction. I think it's important that we enforce it. As I say, if people want to apply for a variance, then so be it. But in the meantime, condemning any neighborhood, let alone the people who are here today, to this kind of excessive noise, the risk to food production, the potential of disease, and all those other things is just entirely unreasonable. Thank you.
And Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, Mayor Krog said a lot of my comments, having come from an agricultural community. There is a very clear reason why you keep agriculture separate from residential. What I want to know is, I agree with the recommendation. What is going to happen, particularly to the operation on uplands? Sorry, can't ask? Shouldn't ask. What will happen with that very large operation that we're talking about? I'm just...
Mr. LaBerge, are you able to comment?
Can you comment?
Well, through the Chair, I would say that any enforcement is complaint-driven. I mean, regardless of whatever the committee or council directs after today, we're not going to go out and proactively enforce our bylaws, but if there are complaints and we find that there's excessive numbers of animals or poultry, then they'll be required to come into compliance.
Yeah, I think Mayor Krog said it, you know, that having a large number of these birds in a residential area that isn't large enough to sustain them is actually, I couldn't even imagine living near. It's unreasonable, and it's dangerous, and it's difficult to manage, and it's not fair for the animals. So if you want, Chair, I certainly would put the recommendation on the table.
I think we're ready for that, if you
Yes.
would, Councillor Perino.
Did you want me to read it?
If you wouldn't mind, please.
That the Governance and Priorities Committee recommend that Council direct staff to prepare amendments to the City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2011, number 4500, as outlined in the staff report dated 2024, April 29th. You don't need the advantages? No. Maybe a seconder?
So that is moved and seconded by Mayor Krog. Thank you. Any further comment, Councillor Perino?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrock.
Thank you. There's no question that I don't support that. I am not supportive of having 150 chickens on 1 acre in the middle of town with roosters. I think that is crazy, and I think it's totally reasonable that we do have bylaw limiting situations like that. So what I'm speaking is not from the perspective of allowing that to occur, but I am not in favor of the bylaw as it currently stands. I think that we can have more reasonable numbers in place. I think for areas less than 450 meters squared, I think 5 chickens. I think from 450 to double that. It's so hard to work in meters squared, by the way. But from places that are a 1/4 acre up to a 1/2 acre, I think allowing 10 is very reasonable. And then I think that on an acre above, 20 chickens is very reasonable. And above 2 acres, you know, you can have 40 chickens. Depending, and maybe on the upper end, maybe there's a limit at 20 chickens from an acre and above. I don't think that number of chickens is going to cause the smell issues that we're getting complaints about on properties that size. And I think that on the smaller properties, the complaints haven't been about smell or numbers. It's about you know, how people are you know, if they're getting loose or from roosters. And so I think that we should be adjusting those numbers at the lower end to make it reasonable, but then addressing some of these big issues that we're hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Manley.
I'm in favor of the motion as it stands. I don't believe we should be changing the numbers. This is supposed to be for personal consumption, not for sale. So for me, I think the numbers very much are in line with personal consumption. If we make them bigger, then people are going to just sell them, and which is technically, as we heard, illegal. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair.
Should be good now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm a huge supporter urban agriculture, but I don't have any chickens, and my peach trees don't bother my neighbors, and the only time my neighbors are bothered by my agricultural output is when I drop zucchinis on their door and ring the bell and run away because I have too many of them. I think like this situation it has gotten out of hand, but we do have some people who have like legacy properties, larger properties, particularly in the South End, where people have been raising animals for quite a long time, and in fact decades on this one property. And I'd like to find a way to have some consideration of it. I don't think we're going to do that at this meeting, and we may want to talk about the number of chickens at another meeting with some kind of motion coming forward. So I'm going to support this motion at this stage right now, because I think we do need to move forward, and we can if there's councillors that want to discuss some kind of other options, then I would be happy to discuss that at a later date. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just state that I tend to agree with the comments that Councillor Manley just expressed. And I just see this motion as moving us forward to amend language to make our bylaw clearer. And I think what it's suggesting, for now at least, is quite reasonable. So I'm seeing no further speakers, so I am going to call the question on the recommended motion, which has been moved and seconded. All in favor, please. And those opposed, I note Councillor Geselbrecht opposed. That motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Rowett and staff. And question period. No questions? Then a motion to adjourn. Councillor Perino, Mayor Krog, all in favor. Opposed, carried. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your time this afternoon.